Now we're going to start over the 1500s with the northern artists. This is a German artist, Matthias Grünewald, and he has created an image of the crucifixion with John the Baptist over here, and John and Mary Magdalene, in a very stark, very grotesque image. There's saints on either side, and there's the lamentation on the bottom. And let's first look at why this image looks the way it does. This is an altarpiece, and it's in a hospital that is specializes in diseases of the skin. So you can imagine that the members of this hospital, the patients of this hospital, would come to the chapel and they would see this image. And this is the everyday image. This is a complex altarpiece with lots of opening doors and different configurations. This is the one that's when everything is closed and what you see most of the time. On special occasions, on Sunday service, they open it up and you can see the inside, and then there's other things you open up on special feast days. We'll look at those. But what we see is this very gruesome image is results of two different kinds of threads we've seen before. The first one goes back all the way to the Vesper built, that little image of a wooden statue that has Mary holding the dead body of Christ, and it's very distorted and exaggerated the pain and suffering, the wounds of Christ, and its design is to engender sympathy and to see that Christ suffered for our sins, and that when we are suffering, we can identify with Christ. So that sensibility of making something so, I guess, ugly and gruesome and all that is part of the German tradition, but also in the North through the whole 1400s that we saw that sequence, the progress going from Lindisfarne brothers through the Marodi altarpiece and Jan van Eyck, that progression towards naturalism and almost photographic realism, and microscopic detail of all the surfaces and materials, rendering of the natural world. Well, after a century of that, when they get to the peak of it, artists, as a matter of course, learn how to do all those things. So if you combined the super detail with the gruesome attitude and the desire to inspire pity, using, showing the pain of Christ, you have an image like this. And given the context, it was perfectly appropriate to have such an image. And the image is very off-putting, to say the least. At least the body of Christ has been tortured, and the surface of the skin is shown in the greatest detail of all of the wounds, marks of having been beaten and bruised and also dead. And the color, I don't have a good image of what the color is supposed to look like, but it's awful color. It makes it look like a not only dead but beginning to putrefy kind of color, and all of the wounds are so realistically rendered with. Let me give you another example. The highlights and shadow to show just the swellings, the little raised skin, just the awful treatment that he received, so that it engenders the pity, and even more so in that people who are in the hospital who are experiencing similar sorts of suffering, that they can identify with Christ, or know that Christ can identify with them. And then when you open it up, you get this. It's very colorful. It has pretty colors in it, and this is the joys. It has on the far left the Annunciation, then the Nativity, and then the Resurrection. And so all of those all of the ugliness and despair that you have when the doors are closed, turn into bright colors and happiness and the joys of the Virgin. And so that contrast is evident, and the sensibility that caused the first to be so realistic is in this realistic as well, but realistic in the surface detail of materials and places, like say the architecture of the inside of this church and the whatever sort of edifice that's here with the I guess this is flamboyant Gothic architecture, and the angels and the pretty colors and the super realistic drapery of the Madonna here, and so you have this wonderful contrast between the two. I think this bottom part here also opens up and reveals what's the kind of thing that's inside. Let me zoom out of this. There's a wood carving on the inside, and the wood carving is done elaborate, lots of details, but it's done in the style that's recognizable as the German sculptural style. We don't. That's not part of the works on our list, but you can see an instance of it. It has the hierarchic scale, like large figures, small figures, donors, different scales, and you have figures down here of Christ and the disciples, and they have the large heads and small bodies that characterize art from early in the previous century. That is not particularly realistic. It is in the painting that what we're interested in here, and you can see an instance of the on the inside here of a kind of thing that we're going to see later, and we all seen before. There's on the right side is the Temptation of Saint Anthony, and we saw a version of this as a print, I believe it was a. I'm trying to think. I guess it was a woodcut. I'm trying to think of whether it was a woodcut or an engraving. I think it was a woodcut, but it might have been an engraving. But anyway, it also has Saint Anthony, and he's being tempted by lots of monsters, and the monsters gave the artist an opportunity to make up all sorts of monsters. And this artist, Grünewald, has made up also all kinds of monsters, but he has the opportunity to do this within the context of a painting. So you have color and much greater variety of tones, and he has a wonderful display. I mean, this is one of the things that this culture does, especially most all of the ones in the north does, is make up monsters, putting composite monsters, or putting composite animals, putting multiple animals together to get a new animal, different parts, or just make something up altogether, new and different. But it's weird. It's kind of when you think of the sensibility that makes the Italian Renaissance. I mean, they never do this kind of thing, or at least they rarely do anything that is deliberately ugly or distorted, or they like the ideals and things looking like the ideal version of a thing rather than the particular or the distorted, or especially the monstrous. Here's the other side with a couple of saints that have to do with the plagues, the people, the skin diseases like plagues or poxes or whatever maladies that they had. They have the patron saints of those things. The body of Christ here going back to the closed version where you see the crucifixion. Let's first look at the realism. The board suspended up here with the INRI, the Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews initials. The shadow on it, I mean, it looks absolutely real and photographic as it can be. And you can tell that the desire was to make this as realistic as possible within the context of making it as gruesome and painful as possible. The nail through the hand and the distortion that it causes in the fingers, that it just looks like pain, and the bend in this in the crossbar It looks like the weight of the body is pulling it down to create that that bow, so as to tell us that the stress that's on his arms to cause that to happen. So you feel the pain and see the distortions, and just consider the difference in the way this treatment of the crucifixion is from the way the Italians would do it. And the Italians don't like the horror show. They want the ideal aspect of the crucifixion, where it reminds you of the victory over death, so that the Christ is shown more heroically. Given that the artist wants to show everything as realistically as possible, it's there are odd things about it as well. I mean, the background is completely without detail. It is just it looks like darkness and featureless landscape, very bleak, without any any interesting rocks or textures to relieve it. It's just a very bleak and plain as you can be, so that the figures are the things that stand out, and their color and their contrast to it. The drawing is odd. It's a I don't have a good reproduction. Maybe you can find the one from the list of works. You click on it, you get might have a better reproduction. But you see that the drawing of faces, and a lot of the drawing of the figures, has that same quality that we've seen before in the previous century, where the Northern artists aren't particularly interested in structures of things, so that when they draw people in space, there's some oddness or distortion, or something. I guess you could call it a particularness. That is, instead of an ideal, the way the Italians would approach anything, and when they want to show something in space, and that they'll show a particular, that is a specific person. It looks the faces look like a particular person that they looked at and copied that person, rather than idealizing it in any way. Here's a close-up of the resurrection that's on the far right side of the opened version, or the open orientation of it. And this is Christ just sort of zooming out of the tomb. There's lots of resurrections where you have the soldiers here, and of course the soldiers are in contemporary male armor and stuff. They're sort of blasted out of the way, while Christ just leaps weightlessly up out into the air, holding his hands up to show his wounds, but he is in a complete victory stance, with a big nimbus around him, and the wonder of this cloth and its rendering of all of its expressive folds, or also show the victory. It looks like it is an explosion up out of the tomb, that has more power than required to make it happen. So it's the excessive power goes into the drapery. This is a wonderful image, a wonderfully imaginative way of expressing the joy and the victory over death, so as to contrast as greatly as possible with the despair that's on the outside. Okay, the next, I want to move on to the next artist is Albrecht Dürer, and I will talk a little bit about him and the fact that he is sort of the counterpoint to Leonardo. He's very much like Leonardo in that he has this curiosity about the nature and the natural world and proportions, and he studied things so as to know them. He did use that knowledge in his art, and he made a lot more art than Leonardo did. He had a great facility with drawing. He desired very much to bring into his art qualities that the Italians had. He made trips to Italy studied them, he probably met Leonardo. He probably met the great artists of the time, both the Florentines, Rome. He probably went to Rome, and also the Venetians. And he absorbed a lot of their culture and brought it to Germany, and used some of it in his art. He already had this great. When I talk about the facility, let's look just an example of one of his drawings. This is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. He just has this knack for representing volumes and textures and tones with line, and to me this sort of thing is incredible. This ability to render, but when you look at the overall effect, it's a different kind of thing than the Leonardo type of drawing. The way I would put it is that Leonardo was also interested in drawing things from nature and being very accurate, being faithful to what nature looks like. But he also idealized things. When he drew a picture of a flower, of a bit of grass, or some little plant or some little object, a little animal, whatever, he looks at all the details and then he makes something beautiful, something. He brings it into a realm of idealization it looks so like the particular thing that he's showing, but particular things don't look like that. They look. He's raised it into the realm of the beauty of an ideal. Germans and Dürer in particular. He looks like he's looking at things and wanting to capture exactly the details, and even to the point of increasing those particular things about the instance that he's looking at. Like he's looking at a person. The person has features, this shaped nose with a bit of crease, a bit of wrinkliness to his face. It looks like he's exaggerated that. He wants to emphasize it, and because it differentiates this person from whatever other person, whereas Leonardo would subtly change things so as to make them look more beautiful or more ideal. Here's an example, of a rabbit, and again, there's a watercolor, and he wants to show every hair, and the details. It's just wonderful to see how he does all of this, and how interested he is in reproducing as faithfully as possible the visual phenomenon of looking at something. So this is consistent with all of the things in the North that we've seen. But the artists of the North that we've seen, the 1400s, almost none of them left any drawings. They didn't spend a lot of time just making a drawing and just to study something. They did all their work, on their panels, I guess, because they may be under drawings or something, but they didn't do lots and lots of preparatory studies that I'm aware of. We don't have any things like that, or not very many. Maybe Jan van Eyck, I think, has maybe a couple, but it's an unusual thing. The drawings are unusual in the North, and the just drawing something for its own sake, for the sake of studying, just to know, wanting to know something, is a Dürer thing. And he must have gotten it, if he didn't already have it, from the Italians, and specifically from Leonardo. Just drawing something to be drawing it, because you're just loving the nature and wanting to see every little detail and represent every detail, and also showing off that you can do something like this. Because this isn't how he made his living, and most of the artists, I suppose, were artists because they were making a living at art, and they probably didn't have time to go out and just do these studies. They learned their art, their trade, in their apprenticeship, and then they went to business and made as much paintings as they could, so as to make a living at it. I guess this is just different in that Dürer has this same sort of quality that Leonardo has, where he wants to study things for their own sake. So what I'm going to show you here in a second is what happened to Dürer. Because he started out, you look at really early things he did, as a traditional German, with the sensibilities, the styles, the kind of art that was being made at the same time in Germany, I guess, in the north. Here's a self-portrait he did in 1493. And he's a young man, he's 22 or so. And he's, it looks like a German thing. It looks like something done by, I don't know, Memling or Bautz, one of them. That kind of thing. He's interested in the surface details of things. There is some oddness about the drawing, the internal structures, but he's pretty good. And it's very consistent. It's with anything in the north, and it follows that pattern that they have of the way they render things. Here's a later one. I'll make it a little smaller so you can see it. A later one that he did a few years later after he had been to Italy. And here, this has a kind of a, the Mona Lisa type pose. And it's, has this window in the background, has many of the characteristics that Italian portraits had. Though it's still done in an Italian, in a northern style, in a German type style, with the super details and the particulars of that, of his features represented. And not idealized at all. You're looking at his face here. I suppose if he wanted to, he could have made himself prettier. He could have made himself more ideal or more, handsomer or something. But it looks like he's trying to accurately copy everything that he sees about his face. And then the one that you have on your list is this self-portrait of 1500. And this is different, and this is much more influence from the Italians, but also there's a tradition in the north of and in Italy of a kind of a portrait of Jesus. This called the Salvator Mundi, which is a savior of the world, and it looks just like this. It's just a portrait of a man looking right out at you, and he's usually making a blessing gesture, and it's just a portrait, as if you would have a portrait of anybody, but it's one of Jesus. And this is taking that type of image and putting your own face on it, and it's a kind of it seemed like an egoist thing to do, but it actually wasn't. It's by portraying himself to look like Jesus is an indication that he, like any Christian, wants to be like Jesus, and that he's well, I guess to some extent there's pride going on here in that he wants to show off his skill, and I guess how good he looks and how expensively he's dressed and how wonderful his head of hair is, and the little curly things he's got going on. But also, he wants to show that he's like Christ, or that he's attempting to be like Christ. Let's look up close and see the super. I wish I had a sharper image than this, but you can see this is almost a photographic representation of his face. He's gone in and looked at every little crease, every little puffiness, the texture of the wetness of his eyes and his lids, the asymmetry of his lips, and so he wants to have every particular detail. There's nothing idealized here. Let's take a look at the fur, the texture of his hair, his skin. He's really showing off his skill as an artist. So let's look at the the next painting on our list. This is the four apostles, and this has some interesting thing about it is that Dürer was, this time there was a conflict between the Catholics and Protestants, and there was a big there was wars between them, and if you're on the Catholic side, then showing that you're on the showing any sympathies for the other side, for the Protestant side, is relatively dangerous. But for some reason, he chose to paint these pictures which show his sympathies with the Protestant side, which he had. This is the four apostles. There's John, Peter, Mark, and Paul, and they're represented in such a way so as to emphasize John and Paul. But let's look at them in terms of the style. This, first of all, the figures are monumental. They're presented right up in front, so as to make them look big and grand and heroic kind of figures. Here, let's look at a view that doesn't have the frames in them. The monumental figures, and they're that's an Italian thing, monumental. But the drapery, look at this drapery. These sharp kinks in it, and the deep folds that you have in here, and there's very, very broad lines of the folds in the cloth, the cascading of the cloth. This is very much like Sluter's rendering of form in his sculpture from the previous century, and this looks very much like that. It doesn't have the forms of say many of the drapery concerns that you see in Jan van Eyck, several of the others, where there's lots of concern about the surface texture and patterns on the surface. There's nothing at all. They're just plain cloth, but they do represent an interest in that volume that you get, and that the kind of surface textures you get in sculpture, or at least that Sluter did. I think the similar thing that Jan van Eyck did on the front of the Ghent altarpiece, the sculptures on the front of it, or the fictive sculptures on the front of it, have the same sort of voluminous draperies. So it's a combination of northern tradition and Italian tradition. This, I don't think it's not a northern quality to have these big monumental figures like this. And that's going to be a characteristic of Dürer throughout, in that he mixes. He takes things from the Italians. He takes things from his tradition, from his own tradition or his own country, and blends them together into a new style. The way he made his money was through prints, though. He did do paintings, and he made some money at paintings, but his living really came through prints. He was a printmaker. He had his own press. He etched, or at least rather engraved, his own engravings. This is a woodcut, though. He started with woodcuts, and if you look at his really early woodcuts, it looks like the kind of thing that there was the typical style, the typical sort of archaic looking style, primitive style of the things before Schorngau. But this is much more sophisticated. This is a woodcut of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse from the illustration from the Apocalypse of John, the Revelation of John. Here's a close-up of it, but I wanted to show you first let's look at another page. This is another page of it, so you can see that it was part of a book of several images illustrating the different parts of the book, of the last book of the Bible, and the fantastical vision that John saw. This is the angels having a war with devils here, and God the Father in the clouds, and I think the stars and the beasts and the number of heads and the crowns on the heads. All these things are described in the Bible, and the sword, the two-edged sword, everything is made literal. That he's spoken in the vision. So Dürer represents each one, and it was a very successful thing. They were all printed together and bound into a book, and people would buy them. And because it's a print, you can make lots and lots of copies and sell them for a smaller amount than you would for a painting. But the cumulative total of all the ones that he would make would be greater than if he had spent that same time making a painting. So that's what I mean when you say he made his living as a printmaker. Going back to the four horsemen of the apocalypse, this is the one that we have as the example on our list. This is a very dynamic image, and you look the energy that's in all these horses and their movement from left to right, and the addition of the clouds and how they are adding to the energy of the scene and the intensity of it. In contrast, let's just show you an early version. This is something from the previous century of also from a northern artist that represents the same thing. This is the four horsemen of the apocalypse. I think the one with the bow and arrow is conquest, and then pestilence and famine. War is here with the sword. The scales here is the pestilence and famine, and then death here is on the horse, and there's the mouth of hell, I guess, coming in the corner here. So you see, this is very primitive looking. Is another example, and this one's almost no movement at all of the. It has the same characters and the same features. There's the mouth of hell down here. Death, pestilence, all these things are represented, but they are. It has a completely different quality. It's I guess decorative. It doesn't seem to have any energy to it. I mean, there's maybe a little bit more in this one for the wavy lines and the implied motion going on. But when you get to this, it seems like a large step forward and towards naturalism, towards creating a work that really really illustrates what's going on and gives a sense of the importance of it, the moment of it, and the just the dynamism of it. But this is what he started with, the woodcuts, and I understand that he didn't cut them himself. He drew the pictures and then had a professional woodcutter cut the what would be the plates that were printed. And one thing you need to understand about woodcuts, if you don't already, is that with this you cut away the white. There's a surface that gets inked, and the very flat surface, the original surface, is what presses into the paper and makes the image. So anything that you want to be white, you have to cut away so that the ink doesn't get on it. But that's different from engravings. Engravings work the opposite way, where you draw the black lines. You take a metal plate and carve away the black lines, and then the ink gets filled into those lines, and the ink is wiped away from the surface. And when it's pressed into the paper touches the ink, and the paper gets ink on it from the lines that you drew. And this is you can see it's a much greater realism and opportunity for detail than you could with woodcuts. And that's the thing about this kind of thing. This medium. Look at the different tonality, say, of the horse's neck that can be made with all these lines that are much closer together, much thinner, and you can get not only the tonality that comes from them being closer together, but their form, that is, their curvature, follows the form of things so as to make them give an even greater illusion of its volume. Going back to this sort of thing, woodcuts don't have that opportunity. There's not as many layers of tone that you can have, and it seems to be cruder as a result. So when you want to have all the detail, the kind of detail that northern artists like to have in their pictures, then engraving is the way to go. I think they take much longer, and I understand that Dürer himself cut these. Now, this isn't one on the list, but if you can tell that this is something where he's been influenced by his trip to Italy. This horse looks like an Italian horse. It looks like it has the ideal proportions of a horse, the kind of thing that would be in many of the monuments, the bronze statues that there are in Italy. There's one by Verrocchio, there's one by Donatello, there's one that Leonardo designed but never did finish. But you know, it is a certain type, and it doesn't look like the rendering that you would have in Germany of that. And also the proportions of the figure. This figure also looks Italian, and its stance. It's just it's to some extent is German and Northern in its tremendous detail and the sophistication of its detail, and the desire to make every surface a different texture so as to differentiate every object that's in it. It's about the stuff. It also is German in the spikiness up here. The Germans like crags and spikes and pointy things, I guess. That's very common in German works, and that's different from Italians. Also monsters. You know, there's death here and the devil here. It's called the Night, Death, and Devil. Is the title of this, and the desire to use your imagination to create all sorts of monsters is also a Northern and specifically German thing. So you have all this stuff in this picture, a combination of Italian stuff and German in the same picture. Now, the one we have on your list is a work called Adam and Eve, and here again is the same sort of combination. Dürer went to Italy. He studied figures. He studied statues. He studied Roman, Greek statues, and came back and created his own system of proportions, similar to what Leonardo did in the Vitruvian Man drawing. He made his own kinds of drawings like that and even published them as a systematic study of human proportions, where he showed with grids and people on grids and showing different relationships of different parts in terms of proportions, because he really wanted to establish the ideal, but it's an ideal that's different from the Italian ideal. The outline of Adam here is it's very much like any Greek or Roman statue. The proportion of the head height and everything, but it's kind of, I guess is Northern or is German in the details. The way the rendering of the tone of all the different muscles seem a little too high contrast, I guess, maybe, or too linear on the inside. I don't know just where to put my finger on what it is that's different about it, but this doesn't look like the Italian version of it. It's only in its proportions. Now, the proportions of the female figure look a lot like the Northern artist, but it actually is based on the Greek Venus. A lot of, there are several examples in Greek, especially later Hellenistic instances where the female figures are like this, have this sort of proportion. But again, it has a German or Northern look to it. The face in particular looks like the same sort of face that's in the Marodi altarpiece and several other of images of the Virgin have this kind of face. It's just particular to the North. Also, if you look at compare this profile to say an actual Roman profile, it has different things. Like the Roman profile, it would be a smooth line going from the forehead down to the tip of the nose, and not have this indentation here or this indentation here. So there's just little subtle differences that it makes it look more like a particular person rather than an idealized person. So he's using the opportunity of or the subject matter of Adam and Eve to give the opportunity for showing a nude male and female, so as to to illustrate his proportional system, but also uses as it's the story of Adam and Eve. So he fills up the background with all of the details, all the the woods, the different textures of the tree, the animals in the background all have some sort of different meaning. If you read your book, it tells all the meanings. The elk is melancholy, and the yellow bile is referenced with the different humors of the body, are different referenced with different animals. The ox and the cat, lethargy of the cat, and I believe it's phlegm is there, and the blood is the rabbit because of the passion and everything. The mouse is a symbol of the devil, and he's just about to be let loose into the world as Adam lives off his foot. And there's the snake, the serpent with the apple. So all these things, he's telling the story, and he's putting all sorts of luscious details everywhere to show his skill in representing all these textures, and sort of giving more value to the print buyer of having all sorts of neat things to look at, just like any northern artist would. But he's also using an Italian sort of chassis on the whole thing. So again, he's combining northern and southern characteristics. He's taking, he himself being northern and German, he has his own style and his own culture to contend with, and he's brought in Italian characteristics to, I guess because he admires it and wants to be like them, but he doesn't want to be so like them as to go and just copy them. Presumably he had the skill to do that if he wanted to, but his market perhaps wants to see this kind of thing, the combination of Italian and the German. Now the next artist is his name is Cranach the Elder, and he's different in that he didn't go to Italy. His version of Adam and Eve looked like this. This is not the one on the list. We're going to look at what is it, the nymph, the fountain nymph, nymph of spring in a moment. But this is the same artist doing the same story, and you can tell the figures are doll-like. In fact, it's retrograde to some point. These figures look like they could come out of the Limburg brothers from 100 years previous. All of the awkwardness, the doll-like proportions, the figure that sort of looks like a paper doll, and the weird proportions are all completely northern and completely part of that tradition, and it doesn't show much sign of the advancement or the progress that had occurred over the course of the century. And it doesn't seem to have any characteristic that you could call Italian, because he wasn't into that. Now his image that we have on our list is the nymph of the spring. His name is Lucas Cranach, and this would be one that you could expect to be you'd want to compare to the Italian version of the Venus of Urbino by Titian. It's the figure's a nude female figure lying down, almost in the same position in the painting as is in the Titian. Even this vertical line separating this part that's closer and this part that's far away is very similar to the Titian. But otherwise, there's worlds apart. The proportions of this figure, the texture of the figure, the way paint is put down, the color scheme, the types of foliage and details and things that are emphasized, everything is just different about this. And the difference comes from the different in cultures. This is a German artist. He has the long tradition of the way figures are represented from his culture, and in that culture, female figures look like this. They have this sort of little swollen belly. They have sort of awkwardness in what appears to be the skeleton underneath doesn't seem to fit actually with what real people have. The scale of the head in relation to the body is large, sort of like a doll. The position of limbs in space and how the figure is oriented to its whatever the ground that it's lying on is kind of ambiguous. It's sort of floating there like a paper doll sitting there. Comparing this to the Venus of Urbino, where all those things are opposite. You can see the structure of the figure. You can see the line. I mean, you can see how the figure is in space exactly as you expect if you were looking at the figure in real life. All of those things that the Italians are interested in, the Germans are not interested in. And they have their own idealized female figure. And this is the example of it. And they're not concerned about the figure in space. They're not concerned about the proportions. They're not concerned about any of those things that the Venetian or the Italians generally are.